The sun was high in the sky when Andrew Jackson stepped off the bus at the corner of 5th and Main. His heart beat a little faster as he looked across the street at Prestige Motors, its glass windows gleaming in the afternoon light. For 2 years, Andrew had been saving every dollar from his weekend job at his uncle's grocery store. Today was the day. He finally had enough for a down payment on his first car. "Just act normal," he whispered to himself, checking his reflection in his phone. He wore clean jeans, his favorite sneakers, and a plain blue hoodie. Nothing fancy, but neat and presentable. Andrew took a deep breath and crossed the street. The moment he pushed through the glass doors, cool air washed over him. The showroom smelled like new leather and expensive cologne. Cars of every color lined the polished floor, some sleek and sporty, others big and powerful. Andrew's eyes widened as he took it all in. One day he thought he might be able to afford one of the luxury models. But for now, he had his sights set on the more practical sedans in the corner. He walked slowly between the vehicles, careful not to touch anything. A few salespeople stood chatting by the main desk, but none approached him. Andrew made his way to a silver 4-door sedan with a price tag that matched his budget. He bent down to look at the interior, imagining himself behind the wheel, driving to school, to work, maybe even taking his mom out for dinner somewhere nice. "Can I help you?" Andrew straightened up and turned around. A tall man with thinning hair and a tight smile was watching him. The name tag on his expensive suit read Thomas Reynolds, floor manager. "Yes, sir," Andrew said, reaching for the folded papers in his back pocket, the printouts of car specs he'd researched for months. "I'm interested in this model. I've been saving up for—" "How old are you, kid?" Thomas cut him off, looking Andrew up and down. 17, sir. But I have my license and—" "Where are your parents?" Thomas glanced toward the door as if expecting someone else to walk in. "My mom's at work. But I have the money for the down payment right here." Andrew reached for his wallet. "I've been saving up for almost 2 years. Thomas stepped between Andrew and the car. "Look, we don't do test drives without a parent present if you're under 18. It's policy." "I understand. I wasn't asking for a test drive yet. I just wanted information about financing and—" "Financing?" Thomas let out a short laugh. "Son, this isn't that kind of place. These cars start at $30,000. Based on—" he gestured vaguely at Andrew's clothes. "Well, I think you might be more comfortable at Car World down the street. They have used vehicles, much more affordable." Andrew felt his face grow hot. "I know what these cost. I've done my research. I have $5,000 for a down payment and proof of income for the monthly payments." 2 security guards appeared behind Thomas, their arms crossed. "Is there a problem here?" one of them asked, looking directly at Andrew. "No problem," Thomas said, not taking his eyes off Andrew. "This young man was just leaving. He's a bit lost." "I'm not lost," Andrew said, his voice rising slightly. "I came here to buy a car. I have the money right here." Thomas shook his head. "Listen, kid, this isn't a game. People come in here to do serious business. We can't have teenagers wasting our time when real customers might walk in." The security guards moved closer. One of them placed a hand on Andrew's shoulder. "Let's go, buddy," he said. "No trouble needed." Andrew wanted to argue, to pull out his money and show them all how wrong they were. But the eyes of everyone in the showroom were on him now. His throat felt tight, and his eyes burned with angry tears he refused to let fall. "Fine," he said, shrugging off the guard's hand. "I'll go somewhere my money is good enough." As the guards escorted him to the door, Andrew pulled out his phone. They could kick him out, but they couldn't stop him from calling his mother. And Diana Jackson wasn't someone who let people disrespect her son. Little did they know who they just turned away. Diana Jackson sat at the head of a long glass table, surrounded by 12 people in business suits. Screens on the wall showed charts with rising lines and numbers in the millions. As the CEO of Jackson Tech Solutions, she was used to commanding attention. Right now, investors from 3 different countries were hanging on her every word. "So as you can see," she said, pointing to the largest screen, "our new software platform is already being adopted by healthcare systems across the country. The first quarter profits exceeded our projections by 32%. A notification lit up her phone, which sat face down on the table. Diana usually ignored calls during meetings, especially ones this important. But when she saw her son's name flash across the screen, something in her stomach tightened. Andra never called during school hours unless it was serious. "Excuse me for one moment," she said smoothly, standing up. "Please review the projections for the next quarter. I'll be right back." Diana stepped into her private office and closed the door. "Andra? Is everything okay?" The voice on the other end was tight with anger. "Mom, you won't believe what just happened." As Andra described how he'd been treated at the dealership, Diana's expression changed from concern to disbelief to cold fury. She'd raised her son to be respectful, to work hard, to save his money. She'd taught him the value of earning things for himself, even though she could have given him anything he wanted. And now some car salesman had humiliated him because of how he looked. "Where are you now?" she asked, her voice calm despite the anger building inside her. "At the bus stop. I'm heading home." "Go home and wait for me." "I'll be there as soon as I can." Diana ended the call and took 3 deep breaths, centering herself the way she did before major business negotiations. Then she walked back into the conference room. "I apologize, but I need to end our meeting early today. Family emergency," she announced. "My assistant will reschedule for tomorrow morning." The investors looked surprised. Diana Jackson was known for her strict professionalism, but no one argued. Within minutes, the room was empty except for Diana and her chief operating officer, Raj Patel. "Everything okay?" Raj asked, concern evident in his voice. They'd been friends since college, building the company together from nothing. "No," Diana said simply. "Someone just made the mistake of judging my son by his appearance." She gathered her things and headed for the door. "Cancel my meetings for the rest of the day. And call Greg from legal. I want him to look into a car dealership called Prestige Motors." 40 minutes later, Diana's driver pulled up to their penthouse apartment. Unlike many wealthy executives, Diana preferred to live in the heart of the city rather than in a gated community. She wanted Andra to grow up understanding all parts of society, not just the privileged bubble most of her colleagues' children lived in. She found Andra in the kitchen, angrily making a sandwich. "Hey," she said gently, setting down her briefcase. "Tell me exactly what happened. Every detail." Andra told the story again, his voice steadier now that he was home. Diana listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When he finished, she sat down across from him at the kitchen island. "I'm sorry that happened to you," she said, "but I'm proud of how you handled it." "I didn't handle it at all," Andra said, pushing his plate away. "I just left. I should have made them listen to me." Diana shook her head. "No. You stayed calm and walked away with your dignity. That took more strength than losing your temper would have." She reached across the counter and took her son's hand. "But that doesn't mean we're going to let this go. Tomorrow, we're going to teach Mr. Thomas Reynolds and Prestige Motors a lesson about judging people." Andra looked up. "How?" "Well," Diana said, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth, "I think it's time for me to buy a new car. And I have very specific ideas about where I want to buy it." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "But this isn't about revenge, Andra. It's about education. About showing people that character isn't determined by clothes or age or anything else they can see at first glance." Andra joined her at the window. "So what's the plan?" Diana turned to face her son, her eyes bright with determination. "Tomorrow morning, we're going back to Prestige Motors. But this time, they're going to learn exactly who they turned away." Diana stood in front of her massive walk-in closet, pushing aside designer suits and dresses. Andra leaned against the doorframe, watching with curiosity. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "Something I wouldn't normally wear to work," Diana replied, digging deeper into the closet. She pulled out a pair of plain jeans and a simple beige sweater. "Perfect." Andra looked confused. "You're going to wear that to the dealership?" Diana held the clothes up against herself, examining her reflection in the full-length mirror. "Yes. When people see me in my usual clothes, they see the CEO first. Tomorrow, I want them to see just another customer walking through their door." She turned to her son with a serious expression. "This is lesson 1. How people treat you often depends on what they think they can get from you." Later that evening, they sat in Diana's home office, the lights of the city twinkling below them through floor-to-ceiling windows. A half-eaten pizza sat between them as Diana sketched out her plan. "We'll arrive separately," she explained. "I want to see how they treat me when I walk in looking like an average person, not knowing who I am." Andrew nodded, taking notes on his phone. "Then what?" "Then we reveal who we actually are." Diana took a sip of water. "But the key is what happens next. I'm not just going to embarrass them and walk away. I want real change." "Like what?" Andrew asked, leaning forward. Diana smiled. "I've been doing some research on Prestige Motors. They're one of the biggest dealerships in the city, but they have almost no diversity in their staff. And they've had 3 complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau about discriminatory practices in the last year." She pulled out a folder and showed Andrew some printouts. "So I've prepared a proposal. If they want my business, and believe me they will, they'll need to agree to some changes." Andrew flipped through the pages. Training programs, community outreach, scholarships. He looked up at his mother, impressed. "You did all this today?" "When I care about something, I move fast," Diana said. "Just like I taught you." They stayed up late discussing the details, with Diana listening carefully to Andrew's input. She wanted him to be part of the solution, not just a bystander. "Remember," she said as they wrapped up, "tomorrow isn't about making them feel bad or getting revenge. It's about creating positive change." "I understand," Andrew replied. "But I still can't wait to see the look on that guy's face when he realizes who I am." Diana laughed. "That part will be satisfying, I admit." The next morning, Diana woke up early. She dressed in the jeans and sweater, pulled her hair back in a simple ponytail, and wore minimal makeup. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. For over 15 years, she'd been Diana Jackson, CEO to the world. Today, she was just Diana. Over breakfast, she reviewed the plan with Andrew one more time. "I'll go in first," she said, spreading jam on her toast. "You'll wait 30 minutes, then come in. Act like you don't know me." "What if they recognize me and kick me out again?" Andrew asked. "They won't," Diana assured him. "Today, you're not going in as a teenager looking to buy his first car. You're going in as my son." Andrew nodded, but still looked nervous. Diana reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You know, when I was starting my company, people underestimated me all the time," she said quietly. "Too young, too female, too black. I heard it all. But I never let their low expectations define me." Andrew had heard pieces of his mother's success story before, but never like this. "What did you do?" "I let their underestimation become my advantage," Diana said. "When people don't see your value, they don't guard against your power. Remember that today." At 10:30, Diana's driver dropped her off a block away from Prestige Motors. She walked the rest of the way, her heart beating a little faster than usual. This wasn't a multi-million-dollar business deal, but somehow it felt more important. As she pushed open the glass doors to the dealership, Diana took a deep breath. Thomas Reynolds was standing near the front desk, talking to another salesperson. He glanced at her briefly, then looked away, uninterested. Diana smiled to herself. Phase 1 of the plan was working perfectly. She walked toward the same sedan Andrew had been looking at yesterday, ready to set things in motion. Diana wandered through the showroom, running her fingers lightly over the hood of a blue sedan. No one approached her. 2 salespeople stood chatting by the coffee machine, occasionally glancing her way, but making no move to help. Diana smiled to herself. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. When men in expensive suits walked in, salespeople practically tripped over themselves to assist. But a woman in jeans and a sweater? Not worth their time. After 10 minutes of being ignored, Diana walked directly to the front desk where a young woman was typing on a computer. "Excuse me," Diana said. "I'd like to speak with someone about purchasing a vehicle." The receptionist looked up, her eyes doing a quick scan of Diana's casual outfit. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Diana replied. "I was hoping to speak with someone today." "Everyone's quite busy with scheduled clients," the receptionist said with a tight smile. "Perhaps you could come back another day? Or I could show you our pre-owned section?" Diana shook her head. "I'm interested in new vehicles actually, several of them." The receptionist's eyebrows went up slightly. "Several? Yes, Diana said calmly. I need to purchase a fleet for my company. The word fleet caught the attention of Thomas Reynolds, who had been walking past. He stopped and turned toward Diana. Did you say fleet? He asked, suddenly interested. Diana nodded. Yes, we need 12 vehicles to start. Thomas's demeanor changed instantly. He stepped forward, extending his hand. Thomas Reynolds, floor manager. I'd be happy to help you with that. May I ask what company you're with? Jackson Tech Solutions, Diana said, shaking his hand firmly. There was a flicker of recognition in Thomas's eyes, but not full realization. The name was familiar. Jackson Tech was well known locally, but he hadn't made the connection to Diana herself yet. Wonderful, Thomas said, gesturing toward his office. Please come this way. Can I get you some coffee? Water? Water would be fine, Diana replied, following him. In his office, Thomas pulled out a chair for her and grabbed a sleek brochure from his desk. Now, for corporate fleets, we offer several excellent options. What sort of vehicles were you thinking of? Mid-range sedans for most, Diana said, and perhaps 2 luxury vehicles for executives. Thomas nodded enthusiastically. Excellent choices. Our sedan line has top safety ratings, and the fuel efficiency will help keep your company's costs down. He flipped through the brochure, pointing out features. And for the executive vehicles, I would recommend our European imports. Very prestigious. Diana listened politely, asking occasional questions. She could see Thomas mentally calculating his commission on 12 vehicles. The dollar signs were practically visible in his eyes. Before we go further, Diana said after a few minutes, I'd like to know more about your customer service philosophy. Thomas looked momentarily confused by the question. Customer service? Well, we pride ourselves on excellent service to our clients. All clients? Diana asked pointedly. Of course, Thomas said, though he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. That's interesting, Diana replied. Because my son had a very different experience here yesterday. Before Thomas could respond, there was a knock at the office door. Thomas looked annoyed at the interruption. Come in, he called. The door opened and Anders stepped into the office. He was dressed differently today, khaki pants and a button-down shirt instead of jeans and a hoodie. Thomas stared at him, recognition slowly dawning on his face. You're the kid from yesterday, he said, his voice tight. Andrew nodded but said nothing. He looked at Diana, playing his part perfectly. Miss Jackson, he said formally, your son called and said you were here. He asked me to bring you these documents. He handed her a folder they had prepared that morning, empty, but Thomas didn't know that. Thomas's eyes darted between them, confusion evident on his face. Your son? Diana took the folder and smiled at Andra. Thank you. Then she turned to Thomas, whose face had gone slightly pale. Yes, Mr. Reynolds. This is my son, Andra. The same young man your security guards escorted out yesterday when he came to buy a car with money he'd saved from 2 years of working weekends. Thomas swallowed hard. There must be some misunderstanding. We have policies about minors without parents. He wasn't asking for a test drive, Diana cut in. He was simply looking at vehicles within his budget. Yet your staff treated him like he didn't belong here. Ms. Jackson, Thomas said, recognition now fully setting in as he connected her to the Diana Jackson he'd occasionally seen in business magazines. If I'd known he was your son. That's exactly the problem, Diana interrupted, her voice calm but firm. You shouldn't need to know who his mother is to treat him with respect. Andra stood silently by the door, watching his mother in action. She hadn't raised her voice once, but her words carried unmistakable power. I came here today, Diana continued, to see firsthand how your establishment treats people based on appearances. And I have to say, you've been quite consistent. The office fell silent. Thomas's face had gone from pale to red. He tugged at his collar as if it had suddenly become too tight. Ms. Jackson, he finally said, his voice strained with forced politeness, I can assure you there's been a terrible misunderstanding. If your son felt unwelcome, I deeply apologize. Diana raised an eyebrow. A misunderstanding? My son told me exactly what happened. He came in with money to buy a car, and you assumed he couldn't afford one because of how he looked. Thomas opened his mouth to respond, but just then the office door swung open. A tall man in an expensive suit burst in, slightly out of breath. "Thomas, I just heard Diana Jackson is." He stopped short when he saw Diana sitting there. "Ms. Jackson, I'm Robert Prestige, the owner." He thrust his hand forward. "It's an honor to have you in our dealership." Diana shook his hand but didn't smile. "Mr. Prestige, I was just discussing with your manager how my son was treated here yesterday." Robert's smile faltered. "Your son?" Andrew stepped forward. "Me, sir. I came in to look at the Southeast model sedan. Mr. Reynolds here had security escort me out." Robert's eyes widened as he looked from Andrew to Diana and back again. I had no idea." He turned to Thomas. "What happened?" Before Thomas could answer, Diana spoke. "What happened is a clear example of prejudice. My son was judged by his age and appearance, not treated as a serious customer." Robert ran a hand through his hair, visibly distressed. "Ms. Jackson, on behalf of Prestige Motors, I offer my sincerest apologies. This is not how we do business." "Isn't it?" Diana opened her purse and pulled out a small tablet. She tapped the screen a few times and handed it to Robert. "These are reviews from 3 other customers who had similar experiences here in the past year. All young people of color who were treated with suspicion or outright hostility." Robert scrolled through the reviews, his face growing more troubled with each one. Thomas stood frozen, looking like he wanted to disappear. I had no idea," Robert said again, but his voice was weaker now. "Most people in positions of power don't," Diana replied, her tone softening slightly. "But ignorance isn't an excuse, especially when it's your business." Andrew watched his mother with quiet admiration. She hadn't raised her voice once, but every word landed with precision. By now, a small crowd had gathered outside the glass-walled office, whispering among themselves. Word had spread quickly through the dealership that Diana Jackson, one of the wealthiest businesswomen in the city, was there and apparently unhappy. "Ms. Jackson," Robert said, setting the tablet down carefully. "What can we do to make this right?" Diana reached for her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "I came prepared with some suggestions." She handed the folder to Robert, who opened it immediately and began scanning the contents. His eyebrows shot up. "This is quite comprehensive," he said. "I don't do things halfway, Mr. Prestige." Robert nodded, continuing to read. "Staff diversity training, community outreach program, internships for underserved youth." He looked up. "This would be a significant undertaking." "So's changing a culture of bias," Diana replied. "But it can be done with commitment and resources." "And if we implement these changes?" Robert asked, already knowing the answer. "Then Jackson Tech Solutions would be pleased to purchase its fleet of vehicles from Prestige Motors," Diana said. 12 vehicles to start, with an ongoing contract for maintenance and replacement. Plus, she added, looking at Andra, "My son still needs his first car." The dollar amount of such a deal hung in the air between them. Even Thomas had perked up, doing the mental calculations. Robert closed the folder and extended his hand to Diana. "Ms. Jackson, we have a deal." Diana shook his hand firmly. "I'll have my legal team draw up the agreement. The diversity training begins next week." Robert nodded, then turned to Andra. "Young man, I owe you a personal apology. Please allow me to help you find the perfect car, at a substantial discount, of course." Andrew looked to his mother, who gave him a slight nod. "Thank you, sir," Andrew said. "But I'd prefer to work with someone else." His eyes scanned the small crowd outside the office, landing on a young salesperson who stood apart from the others. "Maybe her." He pointed to a woman who appeared to be one of the few people of color on the sales team. Robert nodded. "Of course. Lily is one of our best." As they all filed out of the office, Diana placed a hand on Andrew's shoulder. "Proud of you," she whispered. The simple words made his chest swell. Thomas slipped away, muttering something about paperwork. Diana watched him go, then turned to Robert. "You know," she said quietly, "people like your floor manager aren't usually bad people. They just need to be taught to recognize their biases." Robert nodded. "He'll be the first one in that training program. I promise you that." Outside in the showroom, the atmosphere had completely changed. Salespeople who had ignored Diana earlier now hovered nearby, offering water, coffee, or anything else she might need. Andrew noticed how they kept glancing at his mother with a mixture of awe and fear, whispering among themselves when they thought no one was looking. Lily, the saleswoman Andrew had chosen, walked over with a warm smile that seemed genuine compared to the forced politeness of the others. "Hi there," she said, extending her hand first to Andrew, then to Diana. "I'm Lily Chen. Mr. Prestige said you might need some help." "Nice to meet you, Lily," Andrew said, instantly feeling comfortable with her straightforward manner. "I'm looking for my first car." "And I need to discuss fleet options," Diana added. Lily nodded. "Let's start with you, Andrew. What kind of car are you interested in?" As Andrew described what he was looking for, Lily listened attentively, asking smart questions about his needs rather than pushing the most expensive options. Diana watched their interaction with approval, occasionally glancing at Robert Prestige, who stood nearby making sure everything went smoothly. After a few minutes, Lily led them to the silver sedan Andrew had been looking at the day before. "This might be a good fit based on what you've described," she said. "It's reliable, good on gas, and has all the safety features a new driver needs." She opened the door for Andrew. "Want to sit inside?" Andrew slid into the driver's seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Despite everything that had happened, he couldn't help but smile. This was still his first car. While Lily showed Andrew the features, Diana pulled Robert aside. "I meant what I said about those changes," she said quietly. "This isn't just for show. I'll be checking in personally to make sure everything we discussed is implemented." Robert nodded. "I understand. And I want you to know I'm grateful for this wake-up call. My father started this business 40 years ago, and somewhere along the way, we lost sight of treating everyone with respect." Diana studied his face, looking for sincerity. "Actions speak louder than words, Mr. Prestige." "Call me Robert, please," he said. "And I agree, which is why I've already called our HR director. The diversity training starts Monday, not next week." Diana nodded, satisfied for now. She rejoined Andrew, who was now checking out the trunk space with Lily. "What do you think?" she asked her son. "I like it," Andrew said, his excitement breaking through his attempt to look cool and collected. "The price is within my budget too." "Your budget?" Lily asked, looking confused. She glanced between Andrew and his obviously wealthy mother. "My son has been saving for 2 years to buy his first car," Diana explained proudly. "He'll be paying for it himself." Lily's respect for Andrew visibly increased. "That's impressive. Most kids your age I work with are using their parents' money." Andrew shrugged. "My mom taught me the value of earning things for myself." "Smart woman," Lily said with a smile. As they walked to Lily's office to discuss pricing, they passed Thomas, who was helping an older couple. He avoided making eye contact with Diana or Andrew. In Lily's office, she pulled up the vehicle details on her computer. "So the list price is $28,500, but considering the fleet deal with your mother's company, I think we can do better than that." Andrew straightened in his chair. "I don't want a special discount just because of my mom. I want to pay what anyone would pay." Diana felt a surge of pride at her son's words. This was exactly why she'd raised him to earn his own way. "I understand," Lily said. "But even regular customers get discounts through negotiation. How about I show you our standard discount for first-time buyers?" Andrew considered this and nodded. "That sounds fair." As Lily worked out the numbers, Diana's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. "I need to take this. Business emergency." She stepped outside, leaving Andrew to handle the negotiation himself. In the hallway, Diana spoke quietly with her assistant about a minor crisis at the office. As she talked, she watched through the glass as Andrew and Lily went over the paperwork. Her son sat tall in his chair, asking questions and carefully reading before signing anything. His face was serious, mature beyond his 17 years. The sight made Diana's throat tighten unexpectedly. When had her little boy grown up so much? The child who used to need help tying his shoes was now buying his first car, standing up against discrimination, and carrying himself with dignity that many adults couldn't manage. When Diana returned to the office, Andrew and Lily were shaking hands. "All set?" Diana asked. Andrew nodded, his face breaking into a wide smile. "I just bought my first car." "Congratulations," Diana said, giving him a quick hug. I'm so proud of you. Robert Prestige appeared in the doorway. Miss Jackson, if you have a moment, I'd like to show you something. Diana and Anda followed Robert down a hallway lined with framed photos of cars and smiling customers from over the years. He led them to a conference room where a man in a sharp suit was waiting with a laptop. This is Paul, our marketing director, Robert explained. After our conversation, I asked him to put together something right away. Paul nodded at Diana and Anda. Mr. Prestige told me about what happened. I'm sorry you experienced that. His apology seemed sincere, directed mostly at Andra. I want to show you what we're planning to implement immediately. He turned his laptop around to show them a mock-up of a new sign that read, "At Prestige Motors, we value ALL customers." This will go in every entrance, Paul explained. And we're revamping our website to include our new community outreach program. He clicked to another slide that outlined a plan for automotive workshops for local high school students. Diana studied the presentation carefully. It's a good start. There's more, Robert said. He'd handed Diana a folder containing paperwork for an internship program. We want to offer paid internships to students from underprivileged neighborhoods. They'll learn every aspect of the business, from sales to mechanics. Andra leaned forward, genuinely impressed. That could help a lot of kids from my school. Exactly, Robert nodded. And we'd like you to help us design it, if you're willing. Your perspective would be valuable. Andra looked at his mother, surprised. Me? You're exactly who we need, Robert said. Someone young who can tell us what would actually appeal to people your age, not what we think would work. Diana watched her son consider the offer, his face thoughtful. She knew this was another teaching moment, showing him that his voice mattered, that he could turn a negative experience into something positive for others. I'd like to help, Andra finally said, but I have conditions. Robert raised his eyebrows but nodded. Go on. The internships need to pay enough that kids who need to help support their families can still participate, Andra said confidently. And you need to provide transportation because not everyone has a way to get here. Diana fought back a smile. Her son was becoming a negotiator just like her. Those are fair points, Robert agreed. We'll make it work. Outside in the showroom, workers were already making changes. Thomas was helping a young couple who, Diana noted, were dressed similarly to how Andra had been the day before. He seemed to be making a conscious effort to be attentive and respectful. As they walked toward the exit, Andra's new car was being detailed and prepped for him to drive home. Lily gave him the keys with a smile. Your first car, she said. Congratulations again. Thanks for treating me like a real customer, Andra replied. You are a real customer, Lily said simply. The best kind, one who knows what they want and did the work to get it. Diana signed the final paperwork for the fleet purchase, then stepped back as Andra walked around his new car, admiring it from every angle. The shine in his eyes was worth everything. As they prepared to leave, Robert approached Diana one last time. Thank you, he said quietly, for not just walking away angry, for showing us how to do better. Diana nodded. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones we need most. 3 months later, Andrew drove his silver sedan into the Prestige Motors parking lot. He'd come for his first scheduled maintenance check, but also to see how the changes were progressing. The new signs were prominent at every entrance. Inside, he noticed the staff was noticeably more diverse than before. A group of high school students was touring the service department, part of the new community workshop program. Thomas was still there, looking more relaxed than Andrew remembered. When their eyes met, Thomas didn't look away. Instead, he walked over. Good to see you again, Andrew, he said, extending his hand. How's the car running? Great, Andrew replied, shaking his hand. No problems at all. I'm glad to hear it. Thomas hesitated, then added, I want to thank you and your mother. That day was, well, it was a wake-up call I needed. Andrew nodded, not quite ready to absolve him completely, but acknowledging the effort. I'm leading the diversity training now, Thomas continued, using my own mistakes as examples. It's not easy, but it's important. Before Andrew could respond, a teenage boy approached them. He wore a Prestige Motors intern badge. Mr. Reynolds, the new inventory system is giving me an error, he said. I'll help you with that, Kevin, Thomas replied. He turned back to Andrew. Kevin's one of our first interns. Bright kid. As Thomas walked away with the intern, Andrew smiled to himself. He pulled out his phone to call his mother, who was in Tokyo on business. "Hey Mom," he said when she answered. "You won't believe what's happening at the dealership." That night, as Andrew drove home under a sky full of stars, he thought about how one day had changed so much, not just for him, but for the dealership and all the future customers and interns who would walk through those doors. His mother had taught him that real power wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about creating positive change that rippled outward, touching lives beyond your own. He turned up the music in his new car and drove on, feeling like anything was possible.